Okay, thanks, Ron. Wor-Wic Community College is a very small community college in Salisbury, Maryland. It's a very rural area on the eastern shore of Maryland. We have one central campus, but we serve 3 surrounding counties. With most community colleges, our students primarily are part-time attendees, but our full-time equivalency is 3,200 students. Our fiscal year 12 data shows that our per student expenditure is $6,598. We have 216 full-time employees and about just as many part-time faculty. We have centralized purchasing at our college. We do not use P cards. And we have a procurement staff of 2, myself and 1 other person. So we are a very small staff with limited time to get a lot of work finished in the day. We became an ESM Solutions customer in 2012 as part of an ERP selection, which I'll talk about a little further later. Okay, I'd like to start by just giving you a picture of what things were like at our college before we purchased the eProcurement solution. We used to have a financial system called SunGard BiTech. It's a financial system that is heavily used in the K-12 market, and for whatever reason, many years ago, we purchased this for the college. Our users did enter their requisitions in the BiTech system, and it was available to supervisors to approve in the system. The challenge we had was that there was no notification to the supervisor to tell them that a requisition was waiting for their approval. So it was a very manual method by which the person who entered the rec would have to nudge their boss and say, hey, I need you to approve this requisition. And since the system was not very user-friendly, very cumbersome to use, many times that supervisor would just give the user their password and say, go approve it for us. So we had some security issues regarding that. About once a day in purchasing, we would run a report that would show all of the approved orders that were ready for us to process. However, if the department or the requester had a scope of work or a product specification, sometimes they may even already have a quote as a starting point, they would send that to us in interoffice mail. And interoffice mail could add a day or 2 delay to the entire process. So even though we were doing requisitions and approvals in an electronic format, the supporting information wasn't coming with it, so we still had a time delay. Once we processed the purchase order, we would make multiple copies of it. We would send a copy to accounts payable, a copy to receiving, and then a copy back to the original requester. We would fax that purchase order to the vendors, and as we all know, faxing tends to be a very unreliable form of communication. Sometimes, even if you get the confirmation sheet off the fax machine that it went through, you never know what's happening to that PO on the other end. You don't know if it's really getting to the right person or not, and if it's being processed or not. We would have situations where someone would ask us to follow up on their purchase order, and then we'd find out the vendor never got that PO because somehow it got misplaced off of their fax machine. And it was very difficult to look up historical information. If a requester wanted to look up their past requisition, if purchasing wanted to look up past POs, what was the price we paid last time we purchased that item, or who did we get quotes from, it's very tedious to try to dig that out of the old system by scrolling through screen after screen. From our budget manager's perspective, they would become frustrated. They would know how much money was spent against their budget line items per month, but if they wanted details on what orders made up that expenditure, they'd have to come to accounts payable, have a report run that would show the POs against their budget, and then we would dig through file cabinets to pull out those paper POs with the attached documentation to support where that budget expenditure was coming from. So it was very time-consuming, very frustrating. We certainly did not have any data easily available. And here at Wor-Wic, we take our assessment process pretty seriously. We are accredited, and we certainly want to maintain that. And one of the things our assessment department does is an employee satisfaction survey. And every time that survey comes out, the purchasing system was consistently scored among the worst in the college. So although we're doing our best to provide customer service to our internal customers, our hands were really tied by the system that we were using. Next slide. I first learned about eProcurement about 5 years ago, and I was very excited because I realized how easy it was to use, how user-friendly it was, and all the data that would become easily available. It was, in the old system, our current finance system, we're putting lots of data in, but we weren't able to easily retrieve it. eProcurement seemed like it would be the perfect solution to our problem. However, our budgets were tight, as they are at many institutions of higher ed, and I couldn't convince my boss that the time savings and the efficiencies that we would see from using an eProcurement system would justify the expense. So it was denied. A couple of years went by, and the college as a whole, our president began a new initiative to purchase a new ERP solution. At that time, our college, we used 5 different systems. We had BiTech for finance, we had a different student system, different financial aid system, etc. So we began this project to purchase an ERP system that would take care of all of our data needs on the entire campus. I saw that as an opportunity to make sure that eProcurement was included in that RFP. So when our team created the RFP with all of the functionality we wanted out of the ERP, one of the requirements was that it had to integrate with an eProcurement solution. We went through the RFP process, and the team selected DataTel, which is now Lucian, with their colleague package, and ESM Solutions with their Easy Purchase package as our eProcurement system. Then my boss was fully in support of getting an eProcurement solution. He always did see the value, he just couldn't justify it coming out of his operating expense. But since our ERP project was a capital project and it wasn't coming out of his budget necessarily, then he was much more willing to move forward with it. So lesson learned there is I encourage you to look outside your operating budget as a means of finding the funding that you need to move towards eProcurement. Next slide. When it was time to implement, we didn't have too many difficulties, and it actually was very easy. I know from speaking with other colleges that buy-in can be a challenge. If you are used to using a financial system for your purchasing or an ERP, then suddenly you purchase an eProcurement, it can be difficult to get your users on board with using the eProcurement. However, my situation really helped with that because we were doing a full ERP system conversion anyway. It's just instead of training our users on the purchasing module of DataTel Colleague, we trained them on Easy Purchase, the eProcurement solution. So buy-in wasn't a problem. Everyone knew change was coming and we would have to start using a new system. It was just a matter of making the decision to use just the eProcurement and none of the Colleague purchasing module. Implementing ESM was so easy, and not very much time on my part was required. It took less than a day to set up all of our vendors, very little time on my IT staff's part, which I know at our college our IT staff is stretched very thin, especially in the middle of an ERP implementation. But it was a pretty simple process to export our vendors out of the old finance system and import it into ESM, Easy Purchase. The entire process took just a few weeks to implement Easy Purchase. By comparison, it took us 7 months to set up the finance module of DataTel Colleague. We found that Easy Purchase was very easy to use. Training was very simple and quick. ESM Solutions created the training documents, they set up the training database, and they came on site to do the training in one of our computer labs on campus. We trained all of our requisitioners and approvers in about an hour. We had requisitioners and approvers in the same training session so they could see this process from start to finish. And the entire thing, question and answers, the whole 9 yards, took about an hour. And for me, it was quite a relief, because while my peers at the college were struggling to create training documents and set up a training database and get everything ready to train their colleagues in their departments, ESM did it all for me. And it was done. It was simple. I got to keep copies of the training materials so that when new employees are hired, I can train them and they have the backup documentation to support that. The administrators of the system are myself and the one other person here in our purchasing department. And the ESM representative came to our campus 2 days and spent about 4 hours each of those 2 days training us on how to establish the approval routings and set up users in the system. And again, it was very easy, very user-friendly. Next slide. So now that we've been up and running for just about 12 months, this is what life is like at Wor-Wic. For the requisitioners, they log on to the Easy Purchase application and they immediately see a list of all the requisitions that they have created. And it is sorted by date range, and they can do a different sort if they're looking for one particular requisition. They can see right on that first screen the status of the requisition. If the status is partially approved, for example, they can click on it and it will show them exactly which approver is holding it up. So then they can call and bug them and say, hey, approve my rec. They can also see if the PO is processed. They can click on that and see the actual purchase order and any attachments, attached quotations, etc. And they can also see if the order was received and the date that it was received. For the supervisors who approve purchase requisitions, they get an email from ESM Solutions telling them that they have a requisition that requires their attention in the system. So no longer do we have the end user nudging their boss to log in and then their boss turning over a password. Now they get this email, they click on a link from the email to the ESM application, log in, look at the rec, click to approve it, and it moves on to its process. For us in purchasing, we also get an email when a requisition is ready for us to do. And one of the great features of the Easy Purchase application is that instead of us waiting those couple of days for backup information to come inter-office mail with the quotes and the scope of work and the spec, those documents can be scanned and attached to the requisition itself. So when I log into Easy Purchase and I look at those recs that are ready for me to process into POs, I can click on the attachments and see them all right there. So we are really improving our cycle time and our speed of response in processing these purchase orders. It's very simple to create the POs. Those attachments follow from the requisition to the purchase order. And we no longer print any POs. ESM emails us a purchase order after we release it, and then we forward that email to the appropriate vendor. So now we know that the vendor is getting that email, they are getting that purchase order. So we no longer have that black hole that we used to fax to and cross your fingers and hope the right person got it and processed it. Now they're emailed directly to the vendor. We know they have it. We do not send copies to receiving anymore because they can run a report every morning that shows them all of the open purchase orders that are waiting to be received. So then they can plan their day because they know what shipments to expect. We do not send the POs back to the requisitioner because, again, they can log on at any time, look at their rec, and click on the purchase order that was created off of that. And we don't send copies of the POs to accounts payable, and I'll get more into this on the next slide, but that has to do with the integration between ESM and DataTel Colleague. Next screen. So here we are with accounts payable. The integration between ESM's Easy Purchase and DataTel's Colleague applications is very tightly integrated. So we do all of our requisitions, approvals, purchase orders, and receiving in Easy Purchase. when those transactions occur in Easy Purchase, that information is populated into the corresponding fields in Colleague. So if I wanted to, I could go in the purchasing module in Colleague and I will see the requisition, I will see the purchase order, and I will see the receiving data. Notes fields come over, part numbers come over, receipt date, everything comes over into Colleague. However, we do all our work in Easy Purchase. And the benefit of this is numerous. For accounts payable, since we pay out of Colleague, when she gets an invoice, she can see in the Colleague system that it was purchased and received, and she can do her three-way match because the data is there. For the budget owner, they can, again, go into Colleague to pull up their budget, and they can drill down to the purchase orders that make up the expenses against their budget. So they can see all the detail right there in the system. There's no more coming into the accounting office asking for a report and then going to a file cabinet pulling out copies upon copies of old purchase orders. It's all right there at their fingertips. And again, that goes back to the integration between Colleague and Easy Purchase. And I can't stress enough the benefit of scanning those documents and attaching it to the requisitions and POs in the system. It has saved us a ton of time. It has eliminated file cabinets. We are moving on our way to getting rid of all of this paper. And a good example of that is our annual audit. When the auditors come in, they typically pull about 60 purchase orders. And it would take us a few hours to go into those file cabinets, pull out those POs, make sure we have copies of everything that goes with the PO, the invoice, the packing slip, the quotes, the scope of work, all that stuff. Now that it's accessible online, it takes us about 20 minutes. It's just a couple of clicks, boom, there it is. So it really has been a tremendous time saving. Next slide. One of the important lessons that I've learned, and I hope that my story will share with you, many times we know we need to make improvements in our processes, and we know that in the long run the benefits will be great, but we just don't have the time to spend up front to put in these new processes that will ultimately save us time. But I have to tell you that implementing Easy Purchase, I did not have to put much time in up front. The system is very user-friendly, and ESM does a lot of the implementation work for you. So it really didn't take us off our primary task for more than a couple of days during that implementation time, which was really only a few weeks. Another thing I would like that you to understand from our experience, and that will help you, is that when you have a small department and you are understaffed, as we are, sometimes you can convince your boss that technology can make improvements where you no longer need that additional headcount that you've been begging for several years. And for our situation, we were really at a point where we needed a third person in the purchasing department, but that wasn't going to happen. And as I said, it was hard to convince my boss to go with an eProcurement just based on those soft savings. So I was very fortunate to have that situation where I could make that part of the ERP package. And we've seen that now we don't need that third person. The time savings by improving our processes and using the technology has been so great that we no longer need a third person like we thought we did before. And software is less expensive than a person. You don't have to find an office for software to sit. But we really have seen the benefit and the difference. And now I actually have time to go back and work on some projects that kept getting pushed aside for the last couple of years. Next slide. So what's next for Wor-Wic is the spend analytics. Now we have that data that we can easily access. We're doing a better job on our compliance, and we have better data to go back and negotiate with our vendors. But I would like to spend more time doing that and really dig into the spend analytics of Easy Purchase. The other thing we're going to do is Easy Quote and Easy Bid implementations, because our next step now is to automate those processes that are very manual now, and then do those quotes and bids and convert them to catalogs in the eProcurement solution.